Well, good morning. I wanted to welcome Charles Tipton this morning to talk a little bit about his early editorship of ACSM's journal, MSSE. Tip is at University of Arizona, and we just want to talk a little bit, Tip, about those earlier years. You took over the journal after Skip Knudsen.
That's correct. I don't know if members know that Skip and I were classmates at Springfield College. So it's kind of interesting that we've followed each other. It's more like I've followed him because after leaving Springfield, and he subsequently became president, and I followed him as president, and then he also became editor, and I followed him as an editor. So.
When were you guys at Springfield?
I was there from 50 to 52, but he was there from 48 to 52. I transferred to Springfield in 1948.
So both of you have a Karpovich connection.
Yes, yes, we do. And Karpovich, I think, was instrumental in influencing him to go to Denmark, because he studied there with Asmussen, and Karpovich, I came back to study with Karpovich after I got my Ph.D. in Illinois in 1961. So yeah, Karpovich has been in our past as well, and particularly in the colleges as well. He has been very influential in the college and in our role within the college. Mm-hmm.
So you were at Illinois, you had a Curitan connection.
Yeah, I had a Curitan connection. Actually, I did my master's at Illinois with Dr. Curitan, and then I left and I came back and went into physiology. Right. So my master's was with Curitan, but my PhD was more with R.E. Johnson than it was
physiology.
In physiology, that's correct.
Yeah. So you took over the journal in, I wrote it down somewhere, 1980, around there?
That's correct, yeah, 1980, and I was there till 1984.
And what was the journal like then? It was 4 times a year, I guess?
Yeah. That was a very interesting...
It was, I think it might have been 6 times a year.
No, we changed it to 6.
You did?
Yes.
Okay.
There were 2 changes during my tenure, and that was the first, to try to get it to 6 a year. And the second one was that I was there when we changed the name and added exercise to the journal. So those 2 aspects. There was another aspect that I felt was associated with my journal that I take great pride in, is that it was during my tenure that we had initiated the blind review. And at that time, I did a study, and I learned that many of our members, our authors, were very much concerned that their image was being a detriment when they submitted their papers. So we did a study and learned that the majority of the potential authors preferred not to be identified on the manuscript. So we initiated the blind review. We also studied the blind review after it and found that it was pretty blind. Mm-hmm. That about almost 90% of the reviewers did not know who the authors were, and many times the ones that they believed that they thought were the authors were not. Mm-hmm. In some ways, it was worked too with the authors who thought that they would have an idea who the reviewers were. They didn't. Most of them didn't have a clue who the reviewers were. So it was, I thought, an effective experiment that worked very well, mm-hmm. and it lasted until the time of Peter Raven, and then I think it's still associated with the journal, but it's not really followed to the degree that it was implemented.
Mm-hmm. Where were you located physically when you were the editor?
Well, 2 places. Initially, I was at at Iowa, and then I moved to Arizona, and the journal came from Iowa to Arizona.
So at the time, you did most of it at your location. I mean, now they have the journal office in Indianapolis, but you were pretty much self-contained.
Actually, that is correct. The office, we ran the journal from our office before it got consolidated to the degree it is now. Mm-hmm. And I think it was following me that it became consolidated and moved into where it is. And well, I guess it was in Madison, and now it's in Indianapolis. But yes, we ran it out of our offices.
So the college paid for staff?
Oh yeah, they. My managing editor was paid from the college funds, and she was the editor, assistant to the editor, and Carol, who was Carol Christensen, was also the managing editor, but she was still in Madison at the time. So essentially, we ran the office in our sites, Iowa and Arizona, and sent the material to Carol, and Carol took it from there. But all the manuscripts were sent out from our office.
And everything at the time was done by mail, too.
It was, very much so.
We were talking this morning with Kent and Andy, and it's all
electronic,
computerized, electronic now. So
yeah,
that's paperwork.
That's very true, and it was quite a task, particularly to implement the blind review. We had to look at the text to see that the text did not reveal who the author was, as indicated that they indicated who the we were, and they also would indicate where the place was. So we would have to go through and sort of censor that and try to remove that before we would distribute the manuscripts to the various reviewers.
Tell us about the adding of exercise to the title. What the stimulus was, and was there any debate about that?
Yeah, well, it was contentious to some extent, and actually, if you look at the history of the title, about every 10 or so years, the college takes upon itself to consider changing the name. And the fact is, I think the history will show that it was about 2 years ago that the issue came up again. Mm-hmm. So there's this idea of the name of the journal representing the college is not a new issue. It's been an old issue, and it certainly raised its head back in my era. And but the concern was, particularly by the people, the exercise physiologists, but the exercise science, is that exercise, medicine, science, and sports really did not portray that component of the college. Mm-hmm. And as a result, we felt that a change was needed, but we had to be certain that the change did not change the journal so that we lost its heritage. So that necessitated, on my behalf, is to interview people from the Library of Congress about changing names of journals. Mm-hmm. And their advice, very emphatic, was that do not change the name of the journal to the extent that you have to change it so that you start anew with a new heritage, a new history, and so forth. And the only way that we could accomplish that was to put exercise at the end and not anywhere else in the other portion of the journal, so it still would be listed, for example, in Index Medicus, except that its end would be a little bit different.
Have an E on the end.
That's right.
Keep the root MSS.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And so with that advice, we went back to the meeting in Kansas City, and we brought it up. And there was a lot of resistance to having exercise being added, anything to be added, as well as there was a lot of something else to be added. So that battle in Kansas City was not a, quote, clean victory without some rancor. But we prevailed, and it went through, and after that we retained the name that we have now.
Yeah. Was that a publications committee decision?
Oh, yeah, yes, there was a public... No, it came from the Publications Committee to the Board of Trustees.
Okay.
So it was the Board of Trustees.
That had to make the final
The
decision.
Board of Trustees, and it was not unanimous. And actually, Carol Christensen was very much upset about it herself, that we were changing her journal, because she was there at the beginning and took some pride that she was associated with its origin. She was with Balke when he assumed the leadership. So she was very much against it. Even so, we prevailed, and it became Medicine, Science, Sports, and Exercise. And I think it's been a very good decision, and I think it does enhance and represent within the college that component of exercise, which the previous title did not have.
Yeah, I do too. Well, tell me about some of the changes in the type of research that has been done. Particularly, I'm thinking about the early issues about using animal models.
Oh yes, that's...
And a little bit of background about that, because now animal models are pretty much a given, but that wasn't always the case. I mean, there were people that had problems with that.
Well, you're absolutely correct, and you really have to go back to the fact that Bruno, who was our first editor, had a perspective that was not unique to scientists, at least physicians at that time, is that research, particularly with exercise, it should be related only to humans in exercise. Now, Karpovich had the same viewpoint, so Bruno was not alone in this perspective, as did Cureton. And in fact, Cureton and Karpovich both told me personally that they were not in favor of animals being a component of research in exercise physiology. Actually, to Cureton, exercise fitness was equivalent to exercise physiology. So when he talked about fitness, he was talking about exercise physiology and vice versa. And he felt that animals had no place whatsoever. And surprisingly, so did Karpovich. So that when this idea came up by Bruno, and it manifested itself really at an annual meeting in 1970, the issue of animals in research. And in 1970, Bruno was also associated with the program committee of the college at the annual convention. And Phil Golnick and I had 13 abstracts collectively that were rejected solely because they related to animals. Phil had 8 and I had 5. So we had 13 abstracts that were submitted that were rejected at the convention in New Mexico because they related to animals. And that also prevailed pretty much within the journal. So that perspective prevailed. So that issue came to a head about 2 years later, around 72, that we would have not only animal research presented at the annual meeting, but we would also publish it in the journal. So that's the history of that issue at the moment.
By the time you became editor, it was resolved.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, it was still lingering, but at least the journal did not have a unstated policy which was being in effect that they were discouraging animal research. So yes, so by the time I became the editor, that issue had been somewhat resolved.
Okay. Tip, did you have the section editors when you were editor, and the different subject areas within
Well, that's a good question, because if you look at the history, they started out with section editors, and that prevailed quite a few years. What I tried to do was to try to get associate editors and to have what we call as section editors be covered by our associate editors. So the concept still prevailed, but we just had different names for that people being responsible for certain areas. So yes, that was modified, but the concept never really changed, but the terminology was modified with the idea that associate editor with expertise in those areas would be responsible, rather than calling a section of psychology, physiology, medicine, or combinations thereof.
I mean, that was one of the things that I talked about this morning with a couple of the present and immediate past editor, was when you have a journal such as this, that's the Journal of the American College of Sports Medicine, you have a very diverse population there, and if you're trying to have a journal to serve that population, it makes it tough for the editorial board or the editorial staff to pick out, you know, what it is we're going to do and what we're not going to do. For instance, the growth in the clinical portion of the journal.
Well, that's quite true, and if you look at the history of the journal, the clinical component really was added more after my era than it was before.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was also a contentious point with some of the members, because one, there were some who felt it should be solely research, and clinical and applications and epidemiological research really should not be highlighted to the degree that it is now. So that issue manifests itself and virtually resolved after our era than during it. So.
Tip, do you remember, maybe just in a general way, the kind of numbers of manuscripts you were getting when you were editor, and how many you were publishing versus rejecting, and was that ever an issue?
Oh, that's always been an issue.
Yeah.
That's always been an issue. As I recall, we were doing around. With each one of our associate editors, they were doing about 100 or so manuscripts a year. So maybe we were doing maybe a total of 500 manuscripts.
That's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. But it was a lot for the various associate editors to handle. Yeah. But we didn't have as many associate editors as there are now. If you look at the editorial board of this, that there are
a lot. Yeah.
It's rather extensive. Yeah. And my bias is, I think, it is truly a bias, but I think we have too few. I mean, too many, not too few. I think that the impact of the journal is really pretty much related to the associate editors, because it's their selection of the reviewers, their selection and their opinions on the type of manuscripts that determines what ultimately is published.
In the contents,
yeah. And but I think at our time we had about a 65% acceptance rate. We still had around 35%. I think it was about 35% rejection. Yeah.
How did the journal, I know there were fewer journals at the time when you were editor, Tip, but how did it stack up at the time? I mean, it seems to me it's always been well received in the field.
Well, that's true. First of all, when we got started, there were not that many as there are now. And always the premier journal in the field, and I think probably still is the Journal of Applied Physiology. Now, I think we are running a much closer quotes race with them, but I still think our impact factors are a little lower than the JAP, but they are, I think collectively we're ranked, the journal is ranked in sports sciences and exercise physiology fairly, yeah, it's really in the top niche.
Yeah. And of course JAP is much more specialized.
Oh yeah, and it has a longer, and it's been associated with the American Physiological Society and has that image behind it. But there was a time when many committees, not publications, but promotion committees were concerned that publication in medicine and science and sports was really a scholarly journal. And there are many, and there are many letters that I've written to indicate to these various committees that indeed medicine and science and sport warranted to be considered as a premier journal, worthy of note when promotions occurred, because...
So that was questioned at one time.
It was, very much so.
Wow.
And it was very, I took it very personal, because it was our attempt to demonstrate that exercise physiology and in related sciences had a journal that was truly rigorous and professional and warranted recognized. Yes, I can remember very many discussions on that particular topic, as well as several letters to try to convince the promotion committee that this individual's publications warranted respect because it was being reviewed rigorously by medicine and science people.
Okay. All right.
And I think that is because the profession changed, so that the individuals that came into exercise science and exercise physiology really had much better scientific training. And many of the people were using images that these were just physical educators calling themselves physical physiologists without the credentials to warrant being recognized for their training.
Did you try to, in that light, Tip, did you actively try to recruit some of the better researchers then to publish in
Absolutely,
MSSS and therefore improve the image as well and get good people associated with it? And
yes, I think that was a part of Bus's job too, and I think he did it, and we certainly did it. And I know I'm pretty sure Skip did it as well, is request individuals to publish. Yeah, that I have written many letters to individuals asking them, please submit your material.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And at first, many were reluctant. It was not an easy sell. And it gradually became accepted, and so now individuals are using medicine, science, and sport to put, quotes, their best material in there, but that did not occur in the early days. That's what I was
thinking, because...
No, that's a fact.
Yeah.
It did not occur, and it had to change. And I won't say that I was responsible for the change, but I was involved in the change along with Skip and Buzz and those who follow me.
It had to be a slow process.
It was,
but the reputation of the journal gradually improved, I'm sure, as you get...
There were some who still thought that it was just a group of physical educators who wanted to wear a different hat and publish our materials with a different name, but with the same old material. So yes, that's why we were quite rigorous, at least in our minds, in reviewing these to demonstrate that indeed the material was rigorous, was scientific, and merited recognition for being a scholarly publication.
And I think it helped too that you and some of the other editors were actually in departments other than physical education.
Yeah, I've always felt that that's been an asset.
I think so.
Particularly in the early days in trying to get recognition for exercise physiology as being a scientific discipline, and that has been enhanced. So that was associated with my joint appointment. I noticed that was associated with Balke's joint appointment, and I think Matthews at Ohio State had a joint appointment. So I think we were the...
who's Matthews?
Don Matthews. Don Matthews really did not contribute to the concept of exercise physiology being a physiological studies of importance. But he did a lot, he demonstrated the concept that a person in physical education could also have a joint appointment in physiology. And so these, and also Phil Golnick at Washington State. He had an appointment with veterinary medicine. So with physical education.
And Buskirk was out of a physiology tradition.
At Penn State, that's right. Buskirk had an appointment at Penn State that bridged the area of physical education and physiology since they didn't have a medical school there, but he was appointed in the graduate college as a professor of physiology to somewhat reflect this new breed, this new emphasis that exercise is a component of physical education and physiology and warranted recognition for its scientific nature and not be a result of the past perceptions of how they looked at exercise. And they were no longer ball bouncers, as we've been called many times.
Right, yeah, I came up through that tradition too. Tip, we only have a few minutes left. Are there any reflections other than we talked about your editorship at time with the journal there in the early 80s?
No, I'm really pleased and proud to have been a part of the evolution of this journal, and I was pleased to be a part in its formulation, and to see how it's grown and developed and how it's evolved into being the journal it is, and I consider that a very outstanding part and privilege of my past, and I'm honored that you have decided to interview past editors of this, because I think it's important that the members of the college know the history of their journal, which is important for its members to know that there are not many societies that give, quotes, the journal to its members.
As part of their membership.
I think that's a unique feature of our organization, but I think our members should appreciate that too, because it's not very common in many professional journals, or societies rather.
On that note too, Tip, and I don't know whether you agree or not, but in talking to people, it seems to me that there's a lot of individuals that are now members of the college that found out about the college through the journal. In other words, the journal was their portal. They knew about the journal and its reputation and read articles in the journal, and then all realized then, oh, this is a publication of the American College of Sports Medicine, and we're sort of drawn into the college through a scholarly direction through the journal itself.
I think that's very true, and I think there's another component to that, is that these individuals who pursue research after with advanced degrees realize that in order to be recognized, they have to publish in a reputable journal that identifies exercise physiology and its implications to others besides their immediate community. And that is why they sought publication in this journal. They want to publish their material in a reputable scientific journal, and this is the journal to publish in, and that brought them into the American College as well. but collectively both were responsible for bringing them in to the college.
Yeah. Okay, Tip, well, thanks so much for
My
sharing
pleasure.
those remembrances with us, and as always, thank you for your long contributions to the college.
I believe in the college. The college has been good to me, and I'm proud to be a part of its past and hopefully its future.
Yeah. Thanks again, Tip.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.